All right. I was just watching a piece on Euro News about progressive political action groups that have been springing up, and these groups like DM25 and Volt in Europe are talking about real reality-based issues and the rise of fascism and racism, which is basically what is commonly known as the right wing. But let's face it, it's not fascism, it's not racism, it's it's criminality, it's point blank, and you have criminals in government and criminals in corporations, and you have criminals in the often referred to as one percenters, and you could even include elements of the 10%. So basically, uh, I've been talking about this. Is that if you look at it critically and if you look at it objectively, what governments have been doing for 40, little over 40 years, is working hand in hand and being just an arm of what they call what everybody refers to as oligarchy, and there is such thing as a shadow government, and the oligarchy has been the shadow government. It has always been so. You can go back throughout all of history, and all shadow governments are basically criminals who want to dictate how all the sheep, which is and the animals, which is rest of the people, should act, how they should think, and what they should offer, and that is what organized crime does. The ones that we hear about on TV shows, movies, in books, um, and also in government law enforcement. Uh, and the fact that no one is pointing out what they do. I mean, what else can you call putting in, like here in the United States, putting in a policy called Citizens United, which basically said you can bribe politicians, except that was written by the oligarchy through the through the lobbyists, through institutions like ALEC, so that they can bribe people to write legislation and policies that take away even the patina of freedom, of democracy, and basically makes a complete and utter criminal mockery that they espouse. And the thing is you have media, the quote unquote news media and entertainment media, and all sorts of other media constantly uh, uh, reinforcing this patina, this veneer of legitimacy, and doing the echo chamber and controlling the thoughts. And so, um, thoughts, ideas, and trajectory, and all, what have you. And I like the fact that the Europeans are going to this, and they say it point blank that they are going to the far left. And but that's another terminology that the criminal media, who are the arm of the oligarchs, uh, have put out. And the thing is there is no such thing as the far left. What it is it's natural law. Natural law is something that's good for all, including the natural world. And so, that's just an example of how criminal the criminal establishment called governments and corporations and the oligarchy and so on and so forth are. Um, so, if you think about it, think about what your TV shows, your movies, and even law enforcement, how they categorize organized crime with extortion, bribery. You have the bully boys that go out, the leg breakers and the kneecappers, and so on and so forth. And so think about it. They're using the quote-unquote lawyers to be the muscle, to do the oppressive kneecapping by setting precedent within laws that are fundamentally regulations, statutes, and whatnot that are fundamentally flawed because they were based on criminal acts, and yet they're excused. And even the progressive side doesn't take the actual objective, certifiably objective terminology and wording to label what is actually happening. It's an escapism from reality. The fact that they'll use the people voted this. Well, how can that be when both in Europe and the older Western European countries, in Australia, basically in the United States and Canada, when they break the law to make sure that people who have a right to vote and have a democracy, which they espouse, and they use voter suppression, they use gerrymandering, they use superdelegates, they use all of this. On top of that, the media and this quote-unquote government officials like law enforcement and whatnot, to make sure that you can't, that your vote doesn't count, or you can't vote, or they make it difficult to get to voting polls, or they simply burn or destroy this is the same thing that the mafia and organized crime did and does. And we all know, like the strong arm tactics that the organized criminals are famous, stereotypically famously known for, and that is using the protection racket. How is that? How is that any different? Because you know how a protection racket works. The organized crime sends over somebody and says, "Oh, you give us money, and we'll protect you," and and so on and so forth. When there was no protection needed. Now, how is that any different from what they're doing with voter suppression? How is that any different from taking away the because protection, the protection racket is nothing more than the illusion, the fantasy of protection, when in fact it is outright extortion with the threats of violence. And yet, that is criminal. But when your veneer and your patina of legitimate officials do it, it's excused. When the legitimate businesses do it, it's excused. So it's we don't have natural laws. Natural laws is something that's commonly shared by us all, and yet there's a double standard. And this has been happening for thousands of years. It's always the criminals who get to the top, who get control because they get control of what gets out there and how you're supposed to think. And how do they do that? Well, one of the ways they do that, and the prime example is Betsy DeVos in the United States, is to make sure that education becomes defunct. And now, this is a tactic that's ancient, that is as ancient as humanity. An ignorant, stupid population which can't think, which is why they also use media to make sure that you think in a certain way so that you can't think for your own self-interest. So with this constant assault, how is that any different? Because the mafia basically says, oh, this is the way it's got to be done. This is what you got to do. Otherwise, you pay the penalty. Well, that's what the government for over 40 years. It's been blatant and brazen, and yet we have even channels like we have even independent media like TYT, Secular Talk, Democracy Now, The Real News, and these genuinely are progressive, or more along the lines of people who think in natural laws. However, even they do talking points. They do this. They do the propaganda, which they themselves argue against, but then do say the contradictory stuff. Just as they accuse the right wing and the fascist, racist, and the oligarchy, they accuse them of being contradictory, and yet They, and yet these progressive channels propagate the same propaganda by not calling a spade a spade. um, you know, there are there are very few exceptional uh, uh, outlets out there, but even they who generally call a spade, but even they have a tendency to sometimes spout the popular uh, echo chamber, and I've done it myself. But that just goes to show you the virulence of what the criminals have established and how they have propagated, how they have uh, how they have uh, endorsed and cushioned and pushed this echo chamber. I consider myself a person who thinks in a natural law way, who I feel that I am working more towards natural law enlightenment and trying to get away from being the human animal who relies on instinct, and instinct being, the emotion and mind not working in conjunction, which is often referred to as spirit. So I'm trying to get away from that corrupted spirit. I want the mind and body and emotion to work in wise conjunction, and that's what I try to go. That doesn't mean that I don't allow my I can't that I don't allow my emotions, my spirit, to allow the anger and so on and so forth to overrule my the more wise course, the more enlightened course. But at the same time, there is something called righteous anger, righteous outrage. And there is a primal, fundamental rightness to that. Because if we can't show that, that's what courage is. Courage is following the natural laws and the outrage, the righteous outrage that knows what is real, and having an all-inclusive take and view and outlook on this. That is something too many lack. It's not enough just to subsist and keep living, because just keep living and subsisting is not a life. It's bowing down and it's saying, I will not speak out for myself. I will not speak out for others. I will not speak out for the good of all. And that is cowardice. And cowardice is what allows these criminals to do what they do. When you don't call it out, you're complicit. We're complicit. We're all complicit when we don't speak out, when we don't take action, because the illusion that everybody keeps talking about, that speech, free speech, and so on and so forth, and that there's a neutrality in there, when there is no neutrality, you have to call a spade a spade. Words, thought, and action have a tie, because that influences how we view. And how we view, if we view in the right, what so many in the echo chamber has called the right wing, is violence against themselves, against others, and against the very world that we have to live in. It's against progress. It's against thinking clearly, objectively, and it builds and puts sedition, angry, ignorant, and emotional outbursts that carries into the physical action. No, you cannot allow such ideological violence to be spouted. You can't say, oh, the media it doesn't tell you, or they misrepresent, or mislead, or they don't do stories, and they lie and cheat and steal. You can't say that at the same time and say that they're legitimate. For all of Trump's faults, and his faults are vastly criminal, which is against the good of all life, all organized life on the planet. And the Republicans and the corporate Democrats and the independents, the centrist independents, they are against the good of all. They, with all and the oligarchs and the 10%ers that think in these terms as centrists. Centrism is another falsehood. It's another echo chamber of falsehood, lies. Moderation, there is no such thing as moderate. Moderation is something you talk about when you eat something, when you consume something, or you do something. That's moderation. That's what being a moderate has to be. There is no such thing as a moderate political ideology or moderate religious ideology, or all these other illusions and fantasies and dementia. We must call a spade a spade. And going back to what the Europeans are doing and establishing these quote unquote far left progressive political action groups, established political action groups listed as being a political group. They have to. I'm speaking directly to you. You can't just do Europe. You got to do. You can't just do Western Europe. You have to do the entirety of Europe, and you have to include Australia, the United States, as well as all the territories that or and ex-territories that Europe and the U.S. And the U.S. has control of. It's got to be an all-inclusive thing. These piecemeal efforts does not confront a system of criminality. And this criminality has enabled the murder, the murdering, and the killing and the oppression of hundreds of millions uh, of people. Which is all us. So if you consider yourself a human being and you don't see color and you don't see religion, and that's another thing. Religion is just another tool, and Christianity, if anything, is just basically, if you call yourself a Christian, you're basically saying, "Oh, I'm I'm worshiping dead emperors of Rome." That's what Christianity is: worship of emperors of Rome, which, not ironically, were all men who were all fascists, who were all criminals. So think about that. You want a movement and you want to establish progressiveness, which in my point of view, progressiveness is about natural law, something we all share in common, even in the animal kingdom. So uh, it has to be an inclusive and as much globally for organized uh, human life. So let's stop being piecemeal, and let's stop doing um, all these small protests, whether it has a million or 100,000. It has to be. It has to be every progressive-minded person, and we have to just ignore the rest of the uninterested and the criminal elements in the population, and just push forward and do not give quarter, and do not allow them to uh, to contaminate uh, what should be the equality that natural law should give us all, because uh, all the rest is not equal, does not follow natural law, is not for the good of all, and that means that they are not uh, they are not grown up enough, enlightened enough, intelligent enough, or uh, conscious enough to become responsible, decent, and natural law abiding members. And I keep saying, being an adult has no age limit, because the simple fact of the matter is there are children who speak with a maturity, wisdom, and enlightenment, uh, versus where we have people who are supposed to be the adults, like Donald Trump, uh, like uh, like Theresa May, and like Angela Merkel, and and you name them. They're supposed to be adults, but uh, they obviously do not show that they are adults. If anything, they are petulant toddlers, and they have no understanding of natural law. So therefore, they have no understanding of what is the good of all, and they have basically thrown out uh, self-interested uh, natural law preservation, which is what the oligarchs, going back to when they were emperors and kings and lords and whatnot. They're all, you can call it aristocracy, you can call it autocrats, you can call them nobility, you can call them, uh, uh, I forget the other words, but they're all the same. It's all the same word for people who are criminals. Criminals always try to rise to the top, as cream does. And the way they do that is they always want to make themselves famous, and they always want to have their names uh, floated around the general populations, just as Trump did. If you think that, if you believe that Trump got to where he is today uh, from out of nowhere, then you would be wrong, because Trump, along with Trump, has always worked to make sure his name is out there. Always. He had a game plan, and he didn't follow through, and he used anything and everything to get where he is. And if you don't believe me, then that just goes to show you how ignorant and stupid, and how you don't follow natural law, and therefore you don't actually count. So, you're not responsible, you're not grown up enough, you're not evolved enough, enlightened enough. Let's let the actual people who are striving to be grown up, who are striving to be uh, natural law followers, take the lead and make an actual life for all of us. Because right now, we don't have an actual life. There is no freedom. There is no pursuit of happiness. There is none of that. There is no democracy. Because we all live in, the vast majority of us live in oppression, live in servitude, indentured or direct, or however you want it. That is what we have. We live in all of that. That's not a life. A life should be, if you have a dream, such as mine, of being able to be build a starship and go travel around the galaxy and the universe, and see new horizons and be an explorer. I should be able to do that. Except in the position I'm in, I can't get the backing. I can't get the education. I can't get access to everything, because I can't break through my economic boundaries, and I can't break through the echo chamber and the thinking that's been generated through this echo chamber And because of that, I can't follow my dreams. And that is what life should be. You should be able to follow your dreams. And my dreams have nothing to do with wanting to have money or fame or any of that or notoriety. Whatever. Those aren't my dreams. And trying to do any of that is not a life. That's just egotism. That's narcissism. That's criminality. It's criminal not to want to be more and be the ideal of the human potential of enlightenment, if evolution. That is what we should all go towards. I don't want to be simply the human animal who lives on instinctual, who has no actual freedom, who has to live in the animalistic style when I know the potential is there to be greater. I don't want to be a leader. Nobody should want to be a leader. People should want to live and evolve and be the human potential that is so talked about in entertainment and TV and in books, and be greater. That should be all of us. That should be for all of us. But the system, the criminal system that bases on money, and so therefore has the greater control to own the lands, own the resources, anything else, that is the oppression that is keeping us down. That is keeping us from reaching the human potential. So, think about it.